Story 1. I remember it really clearly. It was about 20 years ago, back when we lived in Washington. My wife was never the outdoorsy type, so when my son, Brandon, wanted to go camping, it was always just me and him. That wasn't bad, though. It was good father-son time. It was a nice scenic drive on the way to the campsite. I remember Brandon asked me about the music on the radio, and I spent an embarrassingly long time reminiscing about my high school days and what bands I was obsessed with back then. Eventually, we reached our site, and I got to work pitching our tent. Brandon waited patiently. He wasn't the type to go running off or anything, and when it was all set up, me and him went for a hike to take in the nature. It was really peaceful. The woods surrounding the campground were calm and serene. There wasn't any animals out and about, but every once in a while I would stop and point out a deer track or some droppings. It reminded me of when I was a kid spending time with my dad. I suppose I was about 9 years old when I learned about the marvels of deer poop myself. As I looked at him, I couldn't help but see a younger version of myself. We had the same eyes, the same hair, and like most of the people in my family, we had the same birthmark on our upper right arm. It was hard spending time with Brandon sometimes. I worked so often, and sure, it was putting food on the table, but whenever I saw how fast he was growing without me around, the guilt would start to well up inside me. Seeing him smile and laugh that day really uplifted my spirits, though. I was here now, and that's what mattered, is what I'd tell myself whenever the conversation lulled. As we were walking, we suddenly found the trail leading out of the woods and into a beautiful view of the river. I was telling Brandon about erosion and how you could see the effects of the previous year's floods on the riverbank when his expression suddenly changed. He pointed up to the sky and said, "What's that, Dad?" I looked up myself and found that I was just as confused as he was. There was, off in the distance, a dark, triangular-looking object. It hung in the sky perfectly still and then suddenly vanished. Not wanting to lose my reputation as a know-it-all dad, I desperately searched for an explanation before deciding that it must have been a helicopter and telling Brandon as such. He obviously didn't believe me, and frankly, I didn't believe myself either. By the time we got back to our tent, the sun had already started to set. I got Brandon to help me collect some firewood and start up a fire. We roasted some hot dogs and marshmallows. We didn't get to the scary stories, however, as Brandon started nodding off, and I decided it was time for bed. I got Brandon into his sleeping bag, and I crawled into mine right beside him. It was the shaking that woke me at first. I had been in an earthquake before, but this was different. It was hard to describe. It was almost like someone was picking up the earth, and the earth was trying to pull it back. I was still groggy. I reached out to see if Brandon was awake, and I found his sleeping bag empty. I wasn't too panicked yet. Like I said, he wasn't the type to run off, and I always try to keep a level head. I stumbled out of the tent and walked towards where the flashlights were, confident that I would find him near the fire trying to cope with the shaking. Then the lights happened. The whole campground was bathed in a bright, sickly, white light. It was blinding at first, and when my vision adjusted, I realized that Brandon was nowhere to be found. That was when I started to panic. I grabbed a flashlight and started shouting his name. As I ran to the edge of the woods surrounding the campsite, I tried looking for a source for the light, but I couldn't see one. As I ran to the edge of the woods, my pounding heart skipped a beat when I heard Brandon's voice. He called out to me, "Dad, I'm over here." I rushed over. My happiness quickly abated when he started crying, "Help! Something's wrong." I ran to the other side of the campsite and found him crouched away from me in a little ditch. The shaking had mostly subsided, and I rushed over to him. He was facing away from the light, and I put my hand on his back. "What's the matter? Are you hurt?" I could hear him struggling for air. "Dad," he finally cried, "something's wrong. Everything's wrong." His voice was weak. I reached to his hand, and when I touched it, alarm bells rang in my head. His skin was rubbery and wrinkly, like a Halloween mask. I turned my flashlight on, and his whole skin looked a horrid purple. "Brandon," I muttered in shock. I turned him to face me and screamed. His face was emaciated, his eyes so sunken they looked like a skull's empty sockets. His jaw hanged open like the muscles that held it were worn and worthless. My whole body shook in terror. The shaking started back up again, this time even more violently. It seemed as if the ground was going to get ripped up and thrown into the sky. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed Brandon and held him as close to me as I could. I found myself praying to a God I was never sure actually existed. Through gurgles and moans, Brandon started to talk. "It hurts, Dad. Why does it hurt so much? Help me, Dad." As I squeezed him, I could feel him get thinner and thinner, like his insides were being sucked out. It felt like there was nothing left of him. Tears started rolling down my face, and the last thing I heard him say, faint as a whisper, haunted me. "Why won't you help me, Dad?" A nudge caused me to bolt up in my sleeping bag. Brandon was prodding me. "Wake up, Dad. I'm hungry." I got up, more than a little confused. As my heart stopped racing and I came back to reality, I realized that I had just had a crazy nightmare. I chuckled to myself. After Brandon was fed, I walked over to the ditch from the previous night. There was nothing weird or out of the ordinary. Brandon, too, seemed just like he always was and didn't mention anything about the previous night. When I walked back to Brandon and asked if he felt the ground shake, he said he hadn't felt a thing. When we got back to civilization, I asked other people the same thing, and they all agreed with Brandon. For a week then, my mind was at ease. I worked a lot again that week, and when I finally had a day off, me and the wife took Brandon to the pool. It was only there that memories of that night came flooding back, and the horror with it. When Brandon took his shirt off, I looked at his arm and noticed the family birthmark was missing. How to survive your camping experience. General camping rules. Have a sturdy, waterproof container that holds a spare change of clothes and a blanket. This will ensure you have something warm and dry if your tent floods. Place solar lights near your tent stakes. This will keep people from tripping over them or the ropes at night. If the ground is soft from heavy rain, reinforce tent stakes either by weighing them down or by using longer stakes. They can get pulled out of the ground by a strong wind. Otherwise, when planning your camp, allocate 3 extra feet per tent. This leaves rooms for ropes and stakes. If you're camping on an incline, dig a 1-inch wide and 3 deep trench that will direct water around your tents and common area. This will minimize flooding. To maintain adequate water pressure, don't split a water hose more than 3 times. Always ask permission from the campers with the spigot on their land before attaching a hose. Cheap tents and pop-ups from Walmart are not designed for weather. One strong breeze is enough to collapse or flip them. If you insist on using a pop-up, weigh it down and stake it so it doesn't turn into a hazard when it goes flying off. Plan for a tent or day shade collapse. Store valuables in strong containers that won't break if something hits them. Leave your tent closed when you leave. Storms can show up unexpectedly. Pack some heavy blankets. It can get cold at night. Map out your campsite in advance. During peak camping season, the amount of land allotted to a group is limited. Ask for the square footage of your group's tents and make sure they will fit. Site-specific rules. If you hear something trying to enter your tent at night, sit up and say in a clear, calm voice that you are not receiving visitors, but it is welcome to visit in the morning. If a stranger appears the next day asking for entrance to your camp, invite them in and give them food and drink. This will give you good luck for the rest of your stay. Fairy rings are generally benign. If there are the remains of a small animal inside the ring, however, inform camp management immediately. Don't follow the lights. I can't believe I even have to say this one. Don't follow the lights. If you see a group of people dancing in a circle around a fire, you may join them. If they welcome you in, dance with them until the music ends. Do not look at the musicians. If they do not welcome you, but instead stop and stare, back away slowly and then leave. If they follow you, you can try to run, but it is likely already too late. Pray that death comes swiftly. If you think you're lost, stop and look at your surroundings. If everything appears a little gray, like the color has seeped from the world, then you're no longer in the campsite. Seek out the highest hill and beg whatever you find there to return you to the camp. Pray it is in a benevolent mood. If you wake and something is already in your tent, lie very still and say nothing. Do this until it leaves, no matter what it says to you. It can mimic the voices of those you know. Do not be deceived. If you find yourself surrounded by a group of people whose faces you cannot see, not matter how hard you look, give them whatever they request. They will ask for an insignificant part of your body, such as a piece of your earlobe or a single digit from a hand or foot. Try not to scream when they cut it off, or they will help themselves to additional pieces. Do not refuse or try to escape. They will take far more from you if they must obtain it by force. Keep track of what time the charge on the solar lights typically runs out. If the solars go out before then, do not leave your tent until sunup. Do not open the tent, not even to look. Stay in your tent, try to sleep, and wait for daybreak. If you're approached by a man named Bo offering you a drink from a cup made out of a humanoid skull, accept. It will taste foul and you will not be able to eat without vomiting for the next 24 hours. But this is better than what he will do to you if you refuse. If you find evidence that an animal has tried to get into your food overnight, contact camp management. Don't move anything, so that we can inspect the area. It is likely a raccoon, but it's better to be cautious. If you are wandering the campsite with friends and you discover that one has gone missing, contact camp staff immediately. Under no circumstances should you try to find them yourselves, not even if you discover that they're only a short distance away. That might not actually be your friend. If you come across a spider, especially one that is abnormally large, please leave it alone. They tend to the trees. Don't eat food you find sitting out around the campsite. It's not yours, and worse, it might be an offering and you will offend whatever it is intended for. You can buy ice from the children that approach your camp only if they have a wagon. Those are the children of other campers trying to make some extra spending money. They only upcharge by a few dollars, so consider tipping. If a group of children approach without a wagon, do not buy from them. Act like they don't exist. They will eventually leave. Inform the next staff member you see of their visit, so that we can make sure to remove them from the campground. While it can get cold at night, you should not see frost forming inside your tent. If you are woken by the cold and see frost, call the camp emergency number. Stay calm and stay in your tent. We will come get you. Drink enough water. Insufficient hydration has resulted in far more cases of people needing medical intervention than anything else at this camp. I ain't scared of nothing. That's what I yelled to my brother as I slammed the door to my car shut. Things have, changed since then. I've changed. I remember his smirk, how he held out my jacket, the way he spouted off an endless list of things I should be scared of. Skinwalkers and witches and werewolves, oh my. He presented each one as reason after reason of why this idea was stupid, saying I still had time to flake out, save face. I remember rolling my eyes, snatching my jacket from his grasp, sliding into my car and yelling that I'm not scared before speeding away towards the darkening outline of the mountains. They stood out stark against the setting sun like teeth. Boy, how I wish I listened. I was wrong. He was right. I'm fucking scared. Let me back up a bit. It all started about 2 days ago. I was out of my mind, depressed, could barely get out of bed, thought about chucking myself in front of cars, over bridges, off buildings, just dying. I thought about dying all the time. And enough was enough. One of the few friends I had suggested that I try solo camping said it might clear my mind, that the wilderness, the silence, the solitude would do me good. He gave me a list of spots, some more isolated than the others. I decided on the most isolated one, which was about a 3-hour hike from the last campsite far out in the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I remember his face, the surprise, the acceptance. You sure? His voice cracked. I nodded, saying nothing. Okay. I mean, it's a pretty secluded place, especially for a first-time camper. He shrugged. But then again, it's a beautiful spot. It'll definitely give you some perspective. And the night sky out there is insane. I thanked him and turned to leave, but he spoke up again. Hey, don't let the forest spook you, okay? A word of advice from a veteran. Don't go out at night no matter what you hear. You might get totally fucked by a bear or lion. The drive up the mountains was strangely soothing. The gently curving roads that wove their way through the trees and up the rocks were exciting to navigate, and soon my mind was eased into a peaceful contemplation. I had decided to forego electronics this trip, even going as far as securing my phone in my glove box. I wanted to be completely free of all that shit, able to focus on the now rather than ruminate about the past or fear the future. I would be gone for 5 days and 4 nights, enough time for me to hopefully recuperate and reassess my life and what I was doing with it. I soon descended into Estes Park and drove through the picturesque town towards Armimpi, willing myself not to stay at the Stanley instead. I found the entrance to the park with ease and continued to the closest lot to my campsite. Night was now falling, and I silently cursed myself for leaving so late. I sat in my car for a good 30 minutes before deciding that it would be too risky hiking 3 hours in near pitch black. There were 4 other tents set up in the lot I was at with room for 1 more, and soon I had my own tent set up. That night passed comfortably, I was surrounded by chatting, laughing people and unruly, but happy children who ran round and round screaming. A few of them offered me roasted hot dogs and s'mores and beers, and I filled my belly, smiling. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag before the last light from the dying embers faded away. The second night didn't go so smoothly. I woke up late, well rested, but still groggy, and took my time repacking my tent. I hesitated at first, wondering if I should just stay there, but at 3 p.m. another family showed up with proof they had reserved the site. So I gathered my things and set off, and immediately got lost. Navigating by map and compass for the first time and alone is a lot harder than it sounds. And the trees. The trees can be misleading, can turn you around, make you think you're on the right path when really you're miles from where you're supposed to be. Instead of taking me 3 hours to get to the site, it took me nearly twice that time, and I was swiftly losing what little light was left in the day. Finally, I found the site, but before I breathed a sigh of relief, I haphazardly set up my tent, building a small fire in front. It was dark now, and I was jumpy. Every sound I heard was seemingly magnified, every shadow cast by the dim light of the fire, a menace. Spooked, I crawled into the tent and curled up in my bag, trying to will myself into sleep. After a while, I was dozing, about to drift off, when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. My eyes shot open and I reached for my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited. I heard the sound again. Someone or something was definitely walking around my tent. It sounded like whatever they was trying to be quiet, stealthy. That went on for hours in inconsistent bursts until I finally decided it was an animal, scavenging for the scraps or inspecting my tent. By dawn I was dozing again, and the noise had finally stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or two, giving myself time to rest up. I woke up disoriented, exhausted, and started to panic before remembering I was out camping and that I needed to start hiking back. Now, but when I exited the tent, I saw that the sun was already setting. To say I was upset would be an understatement. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, see how far I could get out there. But deep down I knew I'd instantly get lost and probably end up in a worse situation. So, I began collecting as much wood as I could to build a big-ass fire and prepared to hunker down for the night. The light from the sun seemed to disappear unfathomably fast. The third night was, pretty problematic. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down, waiting. I left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted. I know this isn't kosher for camping, but I was improvising, and I was absolutely terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, pathetic, a tiny candle in a sea of shadows. For hours I sat there, listening, afraid. Finally, I realized I was just being ridiculous, that what I had heard the night before was nothing to fear, that my subconscious, my monkey mind, was just playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for no reason. So I bundled myself up and laid down. And I heard it, softly at first. A footstep, then 2, 3, growing louder, bolder. I sat up and felt my eyes increase to the size of saucers and my breath quickened. What was that? I had to know. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was operating purely off of fear. I heard the noise, It sounded like something running and running around and around my tent. Suddenly, the side of my tent pushed in as if someone was slapping it from the outside. "Hey," I yelled, scared out of my wits. "Hey, I'm awake. I'm in here." I tried to stand, tripping myself up in my sleeping bag in the process, and slammed into the front of the tent. Scrambling up, I swiftly unzipped the flap and ran outside with a red-tinted flashlight. I saw a shape scurry away and followed. And there, standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their backs towards me. Their arms were hanging in strange positions by their sides, their heads pointed straight away from me. I took a step towards them, and a branch cracked underneath me. The sound seemed to startle the person, and they turned their head ever so slightly. "Hey," I said again, "what the fuck, man?" And it boiled up, a sound that crescendoed into a scream. It was laughter, and it echoed around me, rattling around in my skull. I ran, leaping into my tent, zipping it up behind me, curling into my sleeping bag, crying. And the world around me exploded, or rather imploded. The walls of the tent shook, like hundreds of hands were slapping it, poking it, punching it. Outside, what sounded like dozens of people running around shattered the silence. I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I think I fainted. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings. I sat up and ran outside, looking around for proof of what I had heard. But there was nothing, no footprints, handprints, or any disturbance at all. "Fuck this," I muttered to myself, throwing my things chaotically into my bag. I would leave today in the dark. I couldn't stay another night here. I was just starting to unpull the tent when I heard a sound in the distance, perhaps carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me. "Help me! Help me! Please! Oh God! Oh God! Help me!" I reacted more out of instinct than logic and began running towards the sound before realizing that I, in no way, was in a place to help whoever was screaming. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, following the voice for about 30 minutes. "Where are you?" I yelled, looking around me through the maze of trees. "I'm here. Where are you?" Quickly the screams descended into a deep, unsettling laughter. Scared out of my mind, I turned and ran back the way I came. By some miracle, I made it back to my site, grabbed my pack, and uprooted the poles of the tent, thinking that I would just roll it up and carry it back instead of taking the time to fold it neatly and shove it into its bag. Around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, like I was about to be swallowed whole by a monstrous mouth. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, but it was only on the third pole of out 6 that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. Confused, I peered into the tent and reeled in horror, too afraid to even scream. There was someone sitting inside. But not just anyone. It was me. Sitting there, pallor and bone-thin, a too-wide grin plastered on my face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each eye which, instead of having green irises, were totally, wholly black. I jumped back, tripping over my own feet. Laughter rose up around me, and as I scrambled up I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent, followed swiftly by the other, then the head. My face that was not my face looked up at me, still smiling, then laughed again. I screamed. I stood. I ran. And I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the right way. I couldn't even use the sun anymore for guidance since it had almost fully set. I ran without looking where I was going, I kept looking behind me to see if that thing, was following me. I could feel the trees scratching me up, pushing against me, like they were trying to hold me back, hold me still until that thing came for me. Suddenly a light flashed in my face, and I ran into something solid, something black, something that wrapped around me. I instantly cowered, hiding my face in my hands. Shit. Oh, please God, no, 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 no. I heard my own voice, terrified, shaking. Hey, calm down. It's okay. You just scared me. Calm down. What's wrong? I looked up and into the worried gray eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact. He was holding me up. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, creating strange shadows behind us. I looked back, fearful of what I might see, but there was nothing, only trees swinging slowly in the slight breeze. Hey, he said again. Was that you? Screaming? I came out here to check. I couldn't speak. I was too terrified. I shook my head. Were you camping out there alone? He asked, letting me go and bending down to retrieve the flashlight. I nodded, then began crying. Hey, it's okay. It can be spooky out here. Come on, my car is right over there. He gestured with his head back behind him. I wiped my nose and blinked, finally finding my voice. Who are you? He glanced at me, then away. A park ranger. But he didn't look like one. He was wearing a smooth black suit, black tie, and white shirt. And his shoes were polished leather, not hiking boots. Come on, he said again, taking my pack and swinging it onto his back. As he did so, his jacket flapped slightly, and I saw what looked like a Sig Sauer handgun strapped to his belt. Okay, I said, looking back behind me again. How did you find me? He shrugged. Good hearing. We entered a small clearing, and I saw a matte black SUV with tinted windows, headlights flaring, engine idling, parked in the middle of it. He popped the trunk and threw my bag in as I climbed into the passenger side seat. He climbed in the driver's seat and asked me where he should take me. I told him the lot number, and we were on our way. After a few moments, he flipped the cubby between us open and pulled out a bag. Corn nuts, he asked, holding out the bag to me. I took it gratefully and began chomping away. I licked my fingers, then looked back at him. So, are you really a ranger? He looked at me, then back to the road, but still I stared at him, transfixed. He looked exhausted, his wood-colored hair disheveled and dirty from the forest. The SUV jerked to a sudden stop, and the man let out a slow, low breath. His eyes narrowed, and he looked over at me, then back to the dirt trail in front of us. I followed his gaze, feeling the fear churning up inside me. And there, in the middle of the road, was me. The me that was not me. Its limbs hung limply, as if they were broken, and that sickly smile was still plastered across the face. It waved. The man looked back at me, then back at the thing that was not me, then back at me. I met his gaze. I don't get paid enough for this shit, the man muttered before slamming his foot on the accelerator straight towards the thing. We both felt the impact. The car bounced over the body and the man kept driving. But around us, in between the trees, stirred into the darkness, laughter boiled up, manic and persistent. We reached the lot in silence, bathed in the first light of the rising sun. The man beside me seemed to be deep in thought, distracted. I was still scared, but hopeful that whatever that thing was, it was now dead, crushed by the car, or at least so badly wounded that it would soon succumb. The SUV slowed to a stop, and the man popped the trunk and hopped out. He walked to the back and grabbed my pack as I jumped out. He handed it to me, and I took it, then thanked him for everything. "No problem," he said, all in a day's or night's work. His lips quivered as if he was about to smile. I turned to leave, but he spoke up again. "Hey." I turned to face him again. "If you ever want to talk about what you, saw, or, just talk, call me." He held out a card. I took it and looked down at it. It was matte black and only had a single number written on it. There was no area code. Then I began, but I heard a door slam and looked up. The man was already back in his car. He waved at me, then sped off back the way we had come, back towards that thing. I shoved the card in my pocket, climbed into my car, and left, breathing a sigh of relief. I still haven't told anyone about what happened, even when they asked why I refused to go camping ever again. I just shrug and tell them it wasn't my thing, that I prefer a warm bed and the bustling sounds of a busy city. Every so often, though, I'll pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone, wondering if I should call. Wondering who the man really was and if he'd really be able to explain what happened to me. I run a private campground. Since my last couple posts have been dedicated to the dumb things my campers and the locals do, I suppose it's only fair if I contribute some of my own stupidity. Though I feel calling it stupidity is a bit of a stretch. Recklessness? Personally, I think of it as doing my job, but maybe some of you will feel otherwise. If you're new here, you should start at the beginning, and if you're totally lost, this might help. I've been trying to figure out what to do in the dark. Maybe I'm being willfully naive, but I can't help but wonder if I restored it, if it had stopped swallowing up people who look at it. Perhaps it's possible for the thing in the dark to live peacefully alongside the campers. Wouldn't that be nice? Make the campground safer by helping one of these inhuman things instead of killing it. What happened with the lady with extra eyes still weighs heavy on me. I went to my brother's house to talk with him about the problem. He spent more time going over Matthias's journal and trying to piece it together with the family notes. I've been relying on him for the more intellectual business of the campground. It's a big relief. I've felt quite overwhelmed lately trying to figure out how to make up for the financial losses of last year while also preparing for the camping season. I'm not sure what I'd do if I had to do research on top of that. Give up sleeping, I guess. My frequent visits have had the happy side effect of improving my relationship with his wife. She still doesn't want her daughter to be involved in the campground, and I've sworn that when she's older, I won't talk about it. And if the subject comes up, I'll make it sound like a bunch of boring paperwork and picking up discarded beer bottles. That'll be easy. It really is a lot of boring paperwork and picking up discarded beer bottles. You all just get to hear about the interesting stuff. I think her daughter is doomed already, but she doesn't need to know that. The campground will call to her like it called to me. She'll love the land because it will feel more like home to her than anywhere else. Her time with the fairies may help her interact with human society, but it'll never erase her connection to the unnatural. If anything, it'll probably make it stronger. Problems for future Kate, I guess. Tyler's wife will have to learn that she can't control her daughter just as we can't control the forest. It has a mind of its own. In the meantime, the changeling is working out. Great. Tyler and his wife have no idea. The changeling is quite good at what she's here to do. I am likely the only person in town that has any idea that the child is not human and that's where the problem lies. The changeling knows I know, and she seems to take glee in doing things to annoy me, knowing that I can't call her out on her behavior. I have been spit on so many times. This change is going to be a nightmare for the next 5 years. My brother, unfortunately, didn't have a lot of information on the thing in the dark. Matthias had some encounters with it, but he didn't make the bargain to help it become whole until near the end of his journal. The coherency deteriorates steadily throughout, and by the end, it's reduced to fragments and hastily scribbled notes that only Matthias could understand. Perhaps the journal started with the intention of being readable by successive generations, but it certainly didn't end that way. Tyler did notice that as the coherency degraded, Matthias's confidence increased. His idle questions decreased and vanished entirely in the last third. No more did he spend pages musing on the nature of heaven and earth and hell, and how all that related to old land, but now his sentences were terse and direct. I must go here. I must do this. I've had brief insights like this before. I can feel some changes to the land, such as the approach of a bad year. I've just never tried to use this to my advantage. It is ephemeral knowledge, coming when I need it and no more. Tyler's theory is that I can hone this sense. He doesn't have it, but he has also spent many years away from the campground and was never keen on it like I was while growing up. Between that and Matthias's journal, he thinks that the key is exposure. The more someone is around the unnatural world, the more in tune with it someone grows. Our evidence is pretty flimsy, I admit. 2 personal anecdotes and a journal that's over 100 years old. I'm used to working off guesses and hunches, though. I plan to start simple. There was no urgency to this, after all. The thing in the dark has been waiting a long time to be made whole already. A little longer won't do any harm. I hope. There's been enough excitement over the past few months that I wanted a bit of a break as well. I wasn't feeling up to a tea party with bow or keg stands with the dancers or storming the hall of the gummy bears. I'd go camping. Nice and simple. A night out in the woods. Or by the edge of the forest, rather. I didn't particularly feel like camping in the deep woods. That'd be asking for trouble. I don't even put campers in the deep woods until the camp is at capacity, and the sheer amount of humans blundering around tends to send most inhuman things back to their lairs. I drove my truck out to a nice spot, set up a tent, and settled in for a quiet evening enjoying the great outdoors. I made a campfire, heated up water for hot chocolate, and was toasting marshmallows when Bo arrived. He sat down without invitation on the ground opposite me. I'd only brought 1 camp chair, and I felt a little bad about that, but he didn't seem to mind. I haven't seen you around for a bit, I said. I show up when you need me. Do I need you right now? Is there something I should know? No. You're already aware of the risks. Camping is not without its dangers. I was outside the protection of my house. I sighed. After a moment, I offered him a marshmallow that had just finished toasting up nicely. It was the least I could do, since I didn't have any hot chocolate to give him. He dropped it in his skull cup. I'm so sorry to whatever camper has to drink from it next. My bad. I'm not sure what's in there, but it cannot possibly taste good paired with a marshmallow. Well, if I'm in no more danger than normal, I said, I'm still curious as to why you're here. Why I'm here? He asked sharply. You're the one taking up residence in the forest for the night. That got my attention. I seized on it with a sudden hope and an even greater fear. Was this some sort of etiquette violation? Was this the reason these creatures preyed on my campers, because they entered the forest? Should I have asked permission first? I asked nervously. Of me? Of course not. But should I have asked permission? He considered for a moment. I offered him another marshmallow as a bribe, and he added this to his cup as well. His piercings glinted with light from the fire as he stared into the cup's surface, watching the marshmallows drift in the liquid. I don't think it would change anything, he finally said. Permission is not necessary. It is enough to know you're an interloper here. So first off, I'm kind of glad that I don't have to add rule number 1. Ask the forest for permission before you set up your tents to my list, because the pamphlets are already printed for the year, and that's not a small expense. But secondly, yikes. Nervously, I tried to change the topic, because after Bo's comments I could feel the weight of the forest at my back. Like it was pressing down on me, the shadows picking at the edges of the campfire, the branches stretching out fingers towards the back of my neck. Is keeping an eye on me the only reason you're here? I asked. You're here to protect your ticket to Ascension? I'd hoped to get him talking about that long night in my house, listening to the battle raging outside, about how he couldn't ascend yet and what it would take to make that happen. But he gave me such a look of disgust that I was momentarily taken aback. There was scorn in his narrowed eyes. He quickly looked away, abruptly standing to leave, leaving me to wonder what the hell that was all about. Did he not like that I called it out so blatantly? These inhuman things tend to not just say things out loud, after all. Or maybe all the shipping has finally altered his nature and made him care about me, and he's being angsty over having to someday kill me. It's okay to admit you like me. I called after him. We should hang out more. So I guess our relationship has been upgraded to trolling. It's an improvement. Bo's words had left me unsettled, though. Interloper. I've always known it in my heart, but there's a familiarity with this land that makes me feel like I belong here, and that it belongs to me. I didn't linger for much longer. As soon as the fire began to die, I retreated to my tent and huddled in my sleeping bag, pulling a pile of blankets over me for good measure. It's still cold at night. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. There was a snap from somewhere close by, and I was instantly awakened. I lay there, heart pounding, listening intently. It hadn't sounded like a branch breaking. Did a tent pole snap? The tent was still upright, but I ran my gaze along its seams, searching for a bowing of the fabric. Was it something else? Uneasily, I placed my hand on the hilt of the knife that I'd put under my pillow before going to sleep. Nothing. Slowly, I sat up. Perhaps it was a tree branch after all. Or perhaps Bill was pranking me as retaliation for my last comment. Maybe he'd taken up trolling as well. My breath came out in a cloud. It was cold, but I didn't think it should be this cold. I swore and hastily extricated myself out of the sleeping bag. The frost. So much for my bonding experience with the forest. The frost was coming, and I needed to relocate. I grabbed the zipper of the tent and found it wouldn't budge. Now that I was out from under my pile of blankets, my teeth were chattering with the cold. It had come up on me fast. Had it always been this quick to form? I pulled the knife from its sheath. Unfortunately, I'd taken my own advice, and my tent was not cheap. There was a brief moment of mourning for it, and then I slashed an opening into the tent fabric. R.I.P. tent. May you feast with your brethren four-wheelers in Campground Valhalla. My knife struck something that held firm as I cut through the tent. I made another slash, forming a triangle, and then peeled the fabric down. On the other side was a wall of ice. It encased the tent. I slammed the hilt of the knife on it, but it only chipped. It had to be thick. My heart hammered in my chest. How the hell had it formed so quickly? I'd never heard of something like this happening before. I tried to stay calm. Surely this wasn't airtight. Surely I wouldn't run out of oxygen in here, right? Or maybe I wouldn't find out, because I'd just freeze to death first. Frantically, I grabbed my cell phone. It wouldn't hurt to get some backup. I unlocked the phone and found myself staring at an icon notifying me that I had 0 bars. Apparently you can't get cell service when trapped inside an unnatural prison of ice. Who knew? I let the phone slip out of numb fingers. I was on my own. There was no one who would come for me. There was no one left that I could have asked to stand by, just in case. Turtle left. Brian left. My aunt and uncle were dead. The old sheriff had given enough already. And my brother had started a family and had the good sense to stay away from here. I've been alone for a long time. I can't say it doesn't hurt sometimes, when you realize all your friendships are superficial and all it takes to fall apart is for the other person to find something more interesting. I've learned to live with that. Come to expect it, even. It's not so bad being the only person you can rely on. It forces you to fight for yourself. I took the knife in both hands. I slammed the hilt as hard as I could against the ice. I don't think I'm a particularly clever person. I know a lot of stories. I've seen a lot of shit. But I didn't have any great ideas, no plan other than to fight my way out. So I smashed the knife's hilt against the ice, again and again, resolutely chipping away at it. My skin was numb wherever it was exposed to the freezing cold, but I couldn't let myself stop. There was no way out other than through. I put all my muscle behind it, all the strength I had from years of fighting both monsters and the land itself. And then the knife broke. The hilt, made from my second cousin's fibula, cracked in 2 lengthwise. Bits of bone splintered off. And as it broke, there was another sharp crack, like a gunshot, and the ice exploded where the last impact of the knife had landed. It punched through, leaving a hole the size of my fist. Desperately, I shoved my hand through, feeling for the exterior of the ice wall, trying to discern how thick it was. There was a tingling sensation in my other hand, and I glanced down. Blood ran down it, dropping onto the frosted tent floor. My fingers were so numb they hadn't even felt when the blade of the knife sliced them open as I clutched at the broken hilt. From outside the tent, someone grabbed my wrist. I tried to jerk my hand free, but the grip was unrelenting. On the other side of the ice wall, I could only see a hazy outline of a person. "There you are," a man said. "You're quite persistent. Can you get me out of here?" I asked, my voice shaking from how hard I was trembling. The cold had settled into my bones. "I might be able to. Wait a moment for me." He let go. I snatched my hand back and tucked it close to me, shivering as I crouched inside the tent and waited. I had no idea who this person was, but I wasn't going to question it if they were going to help me. Another snap. The sound echoed in the small chamber, loud enough to make me flinch. Another. And then a section of the ice fell away, shattering as it hit the frozen ground beyond. I didn't waste any time. I ducked through, stumbling out and sucking in lungfuls of frosty air. It burned in my throat. All around me the grass was covered in a thick layer of ice. I took small steps, trying not to slip. I had to get out of here. I had to be near the epicenter of the frost, and it was moving far faster and with far more intensity than I was familiar with. I glanced about for my rescuer as I hurried away from the tent. I didn't see them, though, not until a hand seized the back of my head by my hair. On instinct, I stabbed backwards with the knife, but my fingers were still numb from the cold, and I lacked a proper hilt with which to hold it. The blade slipped out of my grasp and fell to the ground. "There's something you should see before you run back to your home," the man said firmly. "Who are you?" I asked desperately. He wasn't human. I could tell that much by how strong his grip was. I struggled briefly and hastily stopped when his grip tightened, my hair pulling painfully against my scalp. I couldn't turn my head in any direction except that which he wanted. He had me look back towards my tent. In front of it, where the campfire had been, was a pit. Not very large, perhaps only 5 feet in diameter. The sides were sheer, as if someone had taken a cookie cutter to the earth. My captor and rescuer shoved me forwards, directing me towards it. Another shove, and I dropped to my knees beside it. The frozen blades of grass stabbed through the thin fabric of my pajamas. "You see them?" the man hissed. He shoved my head closer to the yawning pit. The hole stretched down into the darkness of the earth until light could reach no further. What little soil I could see shone with the silver lacing of frost. It was hard to see much of the sides, for the pit was choked with bodies. They clung to the sides, half engulfed by the soil. Heads and torsos and limbs protruded from the sides, writhing and struggling to pull themselves up out of the earth. Their flesh was pallid and shone with ice. Dead eyes stared up at me, frozen solid, and whitened lips parted to reveal tongues black with frostbite. "Look. See how many there are." I clawed at the hand gripping the back of my head. His flesh was warm, unusual for inhuman things, but his skin refused to yield as I dug my nails into it, trying to draw blood or elicit any sort of reaction that would cause him to release me. "I don't know what you want from me," I cried desperately. "You need to make this right," he said grimly. "The frost will only continue to grow until you do." He hauled, wrenching me to my feet. My eyes watered at the pain at the back of my head. Then he turned me around and shoved me forwards, propelling me away from the pit. "Go," he commanded. "Don't forget what you've seen." As if I could. But I didn't question his benevolence in releasing me, I just ran. I had to get away from here. Back to warmth. Back to safety. And as I hurried away from the frost, I stopped only to grab my knife, and I took a single glance back. The man was gone. Of course, I'd never gotten a look at him. All I have to show for my camping trip is a broken knife and a lot more questions. I'm a campground manager. I have a list of all the creatures on my land and how dangerous I think they are and how urgently I need to deal with them. The thing in the dark was at the top of my list not because I think it outranks things like the harvesters, but because I think it was the one I stood the best odds of being able to do something about. Unfortunately, I think I need to put the frost at the top of that list. The thing in the dark is important, yes, but the frost is now urgent. I need to make this right, he said. And I need to do that before the big events, where I put campers down in the deep woods, where the snow has yet to melt. I love to camp, but after my most recent trip, I don't think it will ever be the same. I set up my tent on nice, flat ground and collected some wood for a fire. The night came with all its nightly sounds, and I relaxed at the hooting owls and chirping crickets. Even better was the fact that no one else was around. Help? It was subtle. I almost missed it. The voice came from deep within the woods, and for a moment I didn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded female, but oddly enough, I just couldn't tell. "Please help," it continued. I shined my flashlight between the bushes and walked around. To be completely honest, even as a grown man, I was paralyzed with fear. So, I did the responsible thing and called the local police. That's when things went from odd to very, very weird. The police told me to ignore it. I explained to them that someone could be injured and probably needed medical attention, but they assured me otherwise. When I kept pushing and asked why, they told me, "Sir, if you ever hear that voice again, ignore it. Do not respond, and do not approach." Well, I did hear it again, but I didn't ignore it. It was almost midnight when I heard the voice a second time. I awoke to someone whispering help, and it sounded like she was just outside my tent. I went out to check and no one was there, but the voice continued from a distance, "Help, please." Again, I grabbed my flashlight and looked around the area I was camping. I was too afraid to follow the voice into the woods, especially since the authorities themselves avoided it. But I struggled morally, trying to decide whether I should go and help this person or listen to the police, who were concerned for my safety. But then I heard another, different voice. This other voice, which also seemed to be coming from the woods, was an octave lower. Unlike the first one, which cried for help, this one was loud and demanding. "Quiet," the other voice demanded. "No one's going to help you." Once I heard that, I was sure someone was in trouble. I called the police again. When I informed them about a second voice coming from the woods, they seemed even more concerned. They told me that I should pack my things and leave the campsite immediately. They said that hearing the second, more manly voice meant that it was getting desperate. They also said that the two voices were coming from the same person. That part was bizarre and confused me, to say the least. It was at this point I dismissed the police in that area as crazy, but not before telling them off. I got angry. I told them that if they didn't get down here to come and check it out, then I would do it myself. I said repeatedly that a woman could be in serious trouble and that it was their duty to help her, but still they refused to come. All they kept repeating to me over the phone was, "Do not enter the woods, sir." They seemed more afraid than I was. Once I hung up the phone, I heard the voices again. A gentle, "Please, somebody help me." And then a growling, "Quiet. No one's coming." It was a little past midnight at that point. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I had the chance to save someone's life but instead cowered. So, I grabbed some things and ventured into the woods. When I entered the woods, the voices ceased. Just like that. No cries, no whispers, and no commands. Even the owls and crickets went away. Nothing but dancing leaves and creaking tree branches. I stopped walking and looked around, a full 360 degrees. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out. Nothing. "I'm here to help," I continued. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Still nothing. I thought of calling the police again, then chuckled to myself. I found it strange but somewhat comforting that I didn't find anyone out there. Nonetheless, I was still creeped out, so I packed my things and finally left the campsite. I didn't know why the police, of all people, were so afraid. Worst case, someone was in actual danger and we've all failed them. Best case, morons who think saying help me in the middle of nowhere is a great idea for a prank. To be honest, when I heard the voice the very first time, I did think it was a joke. When I heard it the second time, along with that other voice, I became a bit more concerned. And same with the third time I heard it in the woods. But when I heard it again a fourth time, a week after I left the campsite, coming from inside my own house, I became very, very concerned.